Hi, I'm William Boardman. What I Learned from The Power of Others by Michael Bond. I want to thank Doug Woodall, a friend of mine, who recommended this book. A fantastic book. Really enjoyed it. It has 8 chapters, and each chapter talks about the power of others. The first chapter talks about emotional contagion, or how emotions can be contagious on a grand scale and affect people. You could understand this because if you hear a sad story, a lot of times you and whoever else is listening feel sad. Another chapter was about crowd smarts, about mobs, riots, and crowds, and how they're not mindless groups, but how they're actually people with shifting identities. You could be who you are right now, but in a group of people who are feeling disenfranchised, you might become a little bit of a different person, a different identity. There were 2 experiments that were mentioned in this book that were very interesting to me. One by Stanley Milgram and the other by Philip Zimbardo, who happens to be Stanley Milgram's high school classmate. In the Milgram experiment, they were showing the obedience to authority. And they got volunteers, and these volunteers were told, you are going to be administering shocks to this other volunteer, and what we're trying to do is figure out how much punishment affects learning. And so if they get a wrong answer, you administer a shock, and then you increase it every time thereafter. Well, they went through this, and the person kept going, increasing, all the way up to the maximum amount of volts. And the way the experiment went, it was quite dramatic because the person on the other end actually wasn't a volunteer, but an actor who was acting out for each shock that they received. They had a response until they reached a certain amount in which they stopped responding. And when you stop responding, that was considered an incorrect answer, and they'd get shocked again. Well, the real experiment was obedience to authority and how the person administering the shocks was affected by the person in the lab coat standing beside them, giving one of 4 responses. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is imperative that you continue. And you really have no choice. You must go on. And so they went all the way up. Most of them, 65% of the people involved, went all the way up to 450 volts. Some did it even though they thought they may have killed the person who they were administering the shocks to. Completely incredible. Why? Why is this? What we found was that people will do terrible things if they think somebody else is responsible. Well, that's something to think about. Now, his classmate, Philip Zimbardo, did the famous Stanford prison experiment. And in this experiment, they took 24 male university students and divided them into 2 groups. They had the prisoners and they had the prison guards. And the prison guards weren't allowed to harm the prisoners, but they were to try to make their lives miserable, make them feel that they were powerless. Well, they kept coming up with great ideas, waking them up in the middle of the night, cleaning toilets with their bare hands, putting them in isolation. There was a number of things they did. This experiment, which was supposed to go for 2 weeks, was shut down after only 6 days because of the stress that the prisoners went through. Many of the prisoners went through. And so that was really interesting. I won't say entertaining, but interesting. And then, years later, out of the blue, comes the Abu Ghraib fiasco. Reality of what Philip Zimbardo did with an experiment that he just cobbled together, came up with ideas and how he was going to do it. actually became a reality in Abu Ghraib. One of the last chapters, talks about how we all fear death. And if you think about that a little bit, it's true. We talk about it, and it's always with an element of fear. Now, I really like the way that Michael Bond summed up the book in the epilogue. He said, "We are pulled by many currents, but it's the people that we swim with that make us who we are." That's what I learned from The Power of Others by Michael Bond.